Welcome to PeoriaRails, a review of railroads serving Peoria, Illinois and vicinity. Located on the Illinois River approximately halfway between Chicago and St. Louis, this central Illinois community of 113,000 residents and a 5-county metro area of 370,000 boasts 9 active common carrier railroads. This map shows our basic area of coverage. Railroads are in black and key cities and towns are in red. Let's begin with the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad. The Tazewell and Peoria Railroad operates on both sides of the Illinois River. It is comprised of the Uptown Division, which is mostly ex-Rock Island trackage, the Southern Division's Southwest Territory, including the Keokuk, Maine, the Southern Division's Southeast Territory, primarily the double track to Pekin, the East Peoria Yard and vicinity, including TP&W connection at P&P Junction, and finally the Nickel Plate Division, which is actually owned by Norfolk Southern. The Tazewell and Peoria Railroad traces its history back to the Peoria and Pekin Union Railway, which was incorporated on September 28, 1880, and began operations on February 1, 1881. On August 20, 2003, P&PU number 802, first of 3 home-built units designated as an SC-15A-3, pulls 15 potash loads down the Keokuk, Maine for Cargill Fertilizer, which is now Mosaic Crop Nutrition. At startup, P&PU acquired the Peoria, Pekin, and Jacksonville's Peoria to Pekin main line and leased the Peoria and Springfield's line, which ran via East Peoria. It purchased the latter in 1883. By this time, a large classification yard, Union Depot, and freight houses were in place to handle rising freight and passenger volume. P&PU 800 leads the Keokuk job through Bridge Junction on October 16, 2003. By the early 20th century, industrial growth and growing importance of the Peoria Gateway as a rate division point for both east-west and north-south freight flows required construction of a large hump yard in East Peoria. Opened in 1907, it was rebuilt into a flat switching facility for safety reasons, reopening in late 1911. On February 25, 2004, P&PU 800 pulls 31 cars toward downtown Peoria. The P&PU ended its own Peoria-Pekin suburban service in 1931, but continued to host its tenants' passenger trains, with the last one discontinued in 1955. P&PU was an early operator of diesel locomotives, purchasing its first in 1936. The road completely dieselized by 1952. The Peoria Gateway experienced a steady decline in freight volume through the 1960s and 1970s. Business declined rapidly in the early 1980s with changes brought about by the Staggers Act. This forced P&PU to downsize its workforce and locomotive fleet. Simultaneously, however, P&PU acquired trackage from defunct Rock Island and continued to function as a vital switching and terminal railroad through the 1980s and 1990s. Genesee and Wyoming's Tazewell and Peoria Railroad entered into a 20-year lease beginning November 1, 2004. The P&PU's locomotive fleet was either sold or rebuilt and repainted in standard G&W orange. On June 22, 2021, SW10 number 1351 was pulling 5 empty corn syrup tank cars from the P&P Fermentation Products plant in downtown Peoria. The Tazewell and Peoria Railroad is a switching and terminal line, which services industries and provides facilities for intermediate handling between line haul carriers. Let's take a tour. We'll begin our journey at the North Limit Yard. On August 31, 2013, Tazewell and Peoria SW10 number 1352, Illinois and Midland SW 1500 number 43, and Central Oregon and Pacific GP38-2 number 3827, which had been assigned to the TP&W, pulled a 105-car potash train through the yard toward downtown Peoria. The Iowa Interstate Railroad had delivered the train, which came off the Canadian Pacific Railway at Davenport, Iowa. Iowa Interstate locomotives, seen in the distance at left, were cut off so the Tazewell and Peoria crew could couple its power and drag the heavy train through town. Then we see it crawling along Water Street through downtown Peoria. The Bob Michael Bridge is in the distance. The Illinois River is out of view at right. Next, our potash train is rolling through Kickapoo Yard. The small yard on Peoria's far south edge is used to support switching operations at several nearby industries, including a steel and wire manufacturing complex, 3 scrap yards, 2 asphalt terminals, and Mosaic Crop Nutrition, which is the potash train's destination. After clearing Bartonville, the train runs along the Kickapoo Main, which in a few miles will end with a connection at the Union Pacific's Peoria subdivision main line. Thirteen 52's crew has been given permission by the Union Pacific dispatcher to enter his railroad's territory. The Tazewell and Peoria Railroad has 3 miles of trackage rights on this Union Pacific line to reach a spur serving Mosaic Crop Nutrition, which is located in an area known as the Pekin Bottoms. The potash train has entered the Union Pacific main line and is shown crossing Mendenhall Road. Our final scene of the potash train shows it crossing Silco Lane. This is where the crew will stop to cut off, run around to the other end of the train using summer siding, and then shove into the Mosaic facility. Shoving the train from this point will enable it to be conveniently broken into cuts so that Mosaic personnel can unload the cars. In a more recent view, Mosaic Crop Nutrition is unloading another unit potash train. In 1968, the Peoria and Pekin Union Railway began serving this facility, then called Cargo Carriers, on a spur built along an abandoned right-of-way to Pekin. In 1997, track capacity was expanded to handle unit grain and potash trains, though only the latter are handled here now. Before shifting our tour across the river, let's review some of the primary industries served by the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad in Peoria. The first one, on the city's north side, is Komatsu America Corporation's mining truck assembly plant. Shown at Alexander Street on June 29, 2021, Illinois and Midland number 43 has just pulled 2 truck chassis loads from the Komatsu plant. The crew will run around its train at the nearby North Limit Yard. The same train pulls 5 empties from P&P Fermentation Products in downtown Peoria. P&P traces its origins to the Lisi Brewing Company, which operated from 1894 to 1917, closing due to wartime demands. Prohibition, enacted in 1920, required repurposing, so Bosch Food Products acquired the plant for malt syrup production. In 1927, Premier Malt Products acquired Bosch's local assets and expanded this plant. By 1933, Premier Malt merged with Pabst Brewing Company. Pabst added a corn mill here in 1938. At the end of 1984, the corn mill closed and the remaining industrial products operation, having adopted its present name, was sold to a pharmaceuticals firm. Rail service returned in early 2007. A pair of SW1500s, Illinois and Midland number 43 and Tazewell and Peoria number 1520, pull through the newly relocated West Yard on September 14, 2014, with 34 cars for the Iowa Interstate Railroad at the North Limit Yard. The old West Yard was closer to the Archer Daniels Midland grain terminal and ethanol plant complex, part of which is seen behind the Cedar Street Bridge. When the city of Peoria wanted to reconfigure a portion of Southwest Washington Street for businesses and pedestrian traffic from 5 lanes to 2, a middle turn lane used to stage ADM-bound grain trucks was to be eliminated. To compensate, a new grain truck staging area had to be created off-street. Moving it closer to the plant, which required relocation of the West Yard, was deemed the best plan. The ADM plant opened in 1934 as a Hiram Walker & Sons facility. For many years it was billed as the world's largest grain distillery. Hiram Walker's fortunes changed in the 1970s with declining demand for hard liquor. Walker announced in 1979 that the plant would close by the end of 1981. ADM purchased it in 1980 and began ethanol production in 1981. Several subsequent expansions have occurred since then. On July 3, 2020, Tazewell and Peoria SW10 number 1351 switches ADM's alcohol tracks, which are located on the west side of the plant. 2 tracks each, holding 4 tank cars, are used to load fuel-grade, industrial, and beverage alcohol. The West Yard is behind the train, and the Cedar Street Bridge is seen in the distance. On September 10, 2021, Tazewell and Peoria SW1500 number 1521 pulls 7 empties from ADM South Yard and off the Riverside Track. In October 2021, Archer Daniels Midland Company agreed to sell its Peoria distillery complex to BioUrgia Renewables LLC for an undisclosed sum. Details are few, but since the announcement, it has been learned that BioUrgia will add biodiesel production using corn oil as feedstock. Number 1521 ran the Uptown Division and left those 7 cars at the West Yard. As seen from the Bob Michael Bridge, it has now backed into a string of cars which it will pull shortly. On May 10, 2021, Tazewell and Peoria number 1521 shoves 22 empty gondolas past the old 90 Yard, which is made up of the 3 stub tracks seen at right. The gondolas had been stored there for a short time and are now likely returning to coiled wire rod service out of Liberty Steel and Wire. The diverging line seen in the foreground leads to Bridge Junction and the Illinois River Bridge. The line in the background is the old BNSF main line, unused for many years now. Illinois and Midland SW1500 number 43 switches Interstate Asphalt Corporation's Peoria River Terminal on December 22, 2019. ADM's Riverside Track serves 3 other firms, most prominent being this one. Seneca Petroleum and Peoria Barge Terminal are the others. Note the Iowa Interstate train in the distance crossing the river. On January 5, 2018, Tazewell and Peoria SW10 number 1351 runs into Allied Iron and Steel's scrap metal processing facility on the city's far south side. A larger scrapyard operated by Alter Metal Recycling is behind me, but rail operations are mostly out of public view. 1351 pulled 3 scrap metal loads from Allied this day. They are likely consigned to Keystone Steel and Wire Company, which has since been renamed Liberty Steel and Wire to reflect its new owner, Liberty House. Liberty Steel and Wire can trace its origins to Tremont, Illinois in 1889. After several years in Peoria, it moved to Bartonville in 1901. The firm operated under the Keystone name until 2019. The large steel and wire complex includes over 2 million square feet of manufacturing space, a scrap metal processing facility operated by Alter Metal Recycling, 2 wire-making mills, rod mill, and electric arc furnace where scrap metal is melted and formed into billets. The original steel mill opened in 1917. The existing furnace, seen here, was installed in the late 1990s as part of a $75 million modernization project. If one is careful, rail operations are observable at some of Liberty's facilities. On May 31, 2013, Tazewell in Peoria number 1352 shoves 4 empty gondolas into then Keystone Steel and Wire Company's main wire mill. There they will be loaded with scrap wire, which will end up being processed and then melted in the steel mill furnace. On November 21, 2021, SW10 number 1351 pulls 8 cars from Keokuk Yard to East Peoria. As the only river crossing between Peoria and East Peoria, the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's Illinois River Bridge is the carrier's most important piece of physical plant. The double-track bridge was originally built in 1911 with a bascule, but was reconstructed with a lift span in 1984 to comply with an order by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to widen the opening for safe passage of barge tows. Today, only 1 track remains in service. Note on the train's rear there are 4 coiled wire rod loads from Liberty Steel and Wire. The Peoria area's largest employer, Caterpillar, assembles large and medium track-type tractors and pipe layers in East Peoria at Building SS, seen here from the Cedar Street Bridge. The Tazewell and Peoria Railroad delivers empty rail cars and pulls loads from a 7-track storage yard seen in the distance. Keene Logistics personnel switch Building SS with a trackmobile. On August 9, 2021, SW10 number 1351 switches an inbound train at the north end of the East Peoria yard. The yard is actually in both East Peoria and Creve Coeur. This facility is divided between A and B yards, with most tracks belonging to the former. Long tracks A33 to A41 are primarily receiving and departure tracks. Tracks A1 to A32 are short tracks used for classification. The B yard's 10 tracks are typically used for storage, but can be used for switching as well. All crews begin their assignments here. Regular jobs starting their runs from this yard work industries at Pekin, Peoria, and Bartonville. Designated as industry jobs, they are numbered 1 through 4. In summer and fall 2021, Industry 4 has been working on various runs each weekday evening, notably on often heavy Powerton turns to interchange with the Illinois and Midland Railroad. Lead jobs, numbered 1 to 3, work the yard and vicinity such as Caterpillar Building SS and a rail car repair shop in East Peoria, and ADM grain and Gavilon fertilizer facilities along the Pekin Main Line in Creve Coeur. Industry and lead jobs may also handle transfers to the TP&W's East Peoria yard when business is heavy or TP&W is short on available crews. Extra jobs are called from here as needed. SW 1500 number 1521, working as the Industry 3 job on Sunday, October 3, 2021, is delivering 38 cars to the Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railway's East Peoria yard. The TP&W's Peoria subdivision begins a short distance east of the North Main Street crossing shown here. The location is known as P&PU Junction. Tazewell and Peoria Railroad crews primarily use the nickel plate division for light engine moves between the north end of the East Peoria yard and the Creve Coeur diesel shop. So this TP&W train, borrowing Tazewell and Peoria GP 38-2 number 2133, is a good substitute. It is running the nickel plate with 30 cars of corn for ADM in Peoria. The Tazewell and Peoria Railroad started operations on November 1, 2004, when it began leasing the Peoria and Pekin Union Railway for a 20-year period. Included in the lease was this diesel locomotive shop in Creve Coeur, which opened back in 1958. Also included was a freight house and platform, now used by Keene Logistics, and a now vacant office building. Both opened in 1957. As you can see, the office building has obviously seen better days. At the south end of the yard in Creve Coeur, SW 1500 number 1521 pulls 21 grain mash loads through the Wesley East area. They're en route to ADM barge loadout facilities a mile or so down the double-track Pekin main line. In winter, when the upper Mississippi River is closed to commercial navigation due to ice and lock repairs, more business shifts to the Illinois River, which is generally ice-free and open year-round. This is when the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad makes as many as 2 daily turns between the East Peoria yard and ADM's Creve Coeur facilities. On March 26, 2021, number 1352 has just arrived Hilliard's with grain mash loads for one of the ADM grain facilities shown here. The barge loadout at left or the grain terminal shown at right. Both can handle 25 cars at a time. ADM 8089, a Paducah shop rebuild GP10, is shown at the barge loadout. On August 20, 2021, number 1352 switches Gavilon Fertilizer LLC, which is another notable industry in Creve Coeur. It receives and mixes various dry and liquid products for local distribution. It also stores soybean oil for Cargill, 8 carloads for which number 1352 delivered on this warm summer Friday. One of those evening Powerton turns mentioned earlier is shown on November 1, 2021, rolling along the double main at Hilliard's. A trio of EMD end-cab switchers, numbers 1351, 1352, and 1521, put on a show with 80 cars, mostly grain mash loads, for interchange to the Illinois and Midland Railroad. These movements commonly occur 2 or 3 times a week. On our final scene of Tazewell and Peoria Railroad action at Hilliard's is this East Peoria bound local out of Pekin on a wintry February 7, 2021. It has a dozen cars behind Illinois and Midland Railroad SW 1500 number 43. Typical traffic includes gluten feed pellets, grain mash, steep water, alcohol, and carbon dioxide refrigerated liquid. Predecessor Peoria and Pekin Union completed installation of centralized traffic control signaling on this line in 1931. Although line-side signals remain in place, traffic levels no longer justify CTC, and train movements are now governed by dispatchers' instructions. Illinois and Midland number 43 pulls 9 cars along Pekin's riverfront on April 21, 2018. Pekin locals use the Ice House lead, which exits the double-track main near the Caroline Street crossing to reach several industries in Pekin. These include 3 ethanol plants, 2 carbon dioxide gas processors, and a grain elevator with barge loading capability. The former Peoria and Pekin Union Farm Yard and former Peoria Terminal Company Pekin Yard are used to support this daily activity. GP10 number 3000 is shown on March 22, 2013 in the Pekin Yards near South Front Street. It is switching 20 cars for what was then called Aventine Renewable Energy. Part of a 99-car unit train, it originated on Canadian Pacific in Minnesota and was delivered to the Pekin Double Track by the Iowa Interstate the day before. This was an unusual movement, but severe drought conditions in 2012 forced local processors to purchase corn from the northern plains well into 2013. In July of that year, number 3000 was reassigned to sister shortline Marquette Rail in Michigan. In our final view of Pekin activity, number 1352 shoves 4 tank cars along South Front Street for 2 industries on April 3, 2015. This track is the Peoria area's last operational stretch of the historic Peoria and Eastern Railway. It was conveyed by its successor, Conrail, to the Peoria and Pekin Union in 1993. Notable customers at Pekin include Alto Pekin LLC's wet corn mill, which manufactures ethanol and various byproducts and supplies carbon dioxide gas to Messer Group's adjacent plant. Behind is a smaller, unseen dry corn mill. Alto Pekin can trace its history back to Illinois sugar refining in 1899, with several owners since then. Alto ICP LLC operates another ethanol plant on Pekin's riverfront and supplies an adjacent Lynn Gas's carbon dioxide processing facility. Alto ICP can trace its history to the American Distilling Company in 1892. Finally, CHS operates this river elevator along South Front Street. Now that we've covered the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad, let's focus on 8 line haul carriers serving the area. First up is BNSF Railway's Peoria subdivision, shown in green, which runs from Galesburg 50 miles southeast to Peoria. In addition, loaded and empty coal trains run on the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad between Peoria and Pekin so they can reach the Illinois and Midland Railroad's Powhatan and Crescent yards. BNSF number 7445 and 7105 lead a 63-car train MGAL PEI across West Farmington Road near Peoria on a wintry February 7, 2021. About half the train is made up of tank cars containing nitrogen fertilizer solution for interchange at the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's East Peoria yard with the Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railway, which will forward this traffic to a customer in central Indiana. Other traffic includes plastic, scrap metal, and coal stragglers, which are moving in manifest service after being bad ordered. This scene was recorded on a Sunday. Normally, MGAL PEI operates on Mondays and Thursdays, but various factors such as availability of crews and locomotives, and also traffic levels, determine if and when it runs. On July 12, 2021, MGAL PEI enters the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad at Dar Street in Peoria. BNSF numbers 4085 and 7674 have an unusually short 14-car train. This time it is making its usual Monday trip. Train symbol MGAL PEI stands for Manifest Galesburg to Peoria. Across the river, it will drop its train at the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's East Peoria yard, couple onto its outbound and run west as MPEI GAL, or Manifest Peoria to Galesburg. Traffic on this day includes 10 tank cars containing petroleum asphalt, an empty tank car used in liquid feed service, a Norfolk Southern coke hopper that is probably consigned to a repair shop, a BNSF boxcar with unknown contents, and an empty carbon dioxide gas tank car. Approaching home rails at Dar Street shortly after leaving East Peoria, numbers 7674 and 4085 have 30 cars for classification at the Galesburg terminal. Some days, MGAL PEI leaves its power on the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's Creve Coeur team track, in which case counterpart MPEI GAL runs the following day, usually Tuesdays and Fridays. Here, MPEI GAL rolls across Keokuk Creek shortly after departing Peoria early afternoon Tuesday, June 22, 2021. BNSF motors 2816, 2017, and 1436 have 44 cars, specifically 30 loads and 14 empties for Galesburg and beyond. Note the 3 Komatsu chassis loads on the head end. Other traffic includes carbon dioxide refrigerated liquid, soybean meal, grain mash, liquid feed, coiled wire rod, and alcohol. Due to a nice variety of traffic, you will see the entire train. It is important to note that this was Peoria's second operational railroad, when the Peoria and Oquawka started service to Galesburg on April 20, 1857. But it was the first railroad built in the city of Peoria. On July 30, 1853, a work train running on a newly completed 4-mile section of track gave city residents their first train ride. They rode in construction cars, but the occasion marked the city's first passenger train. The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad began leasing the line in 1860, then outright purchased it in 1862. The CB&Q was merged into the Burlington Northern in 1970. This line went through yet another merger when BN and Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe created the Burlington Northern and Santa Fe Railway in 1995, merging operations at the end of 1996. The railroad's name was shortened to BNSF Railway in 2005. The train in the prior scene was missing something: Caterpillar tractor loads. So here's an earlier MPEI GAL at Graham Road, a few miles west of Edwards, on July 20, 2020. BNSF motors 2621, 1842, and 3036 have 29 cars. Besides the Caterpillar equipment, the train had coiled wire rod, grain mash, alcohol, and liquid feed loads. Despite the manifest symbols, crews and dispatchers alike often refer to these trains simply as the Peoria Local. BNSF 6406 and 9118 lead a unit coal train across West Farmington Road near Peoria early Sunday afternoon, February 3, 2019. Although the manifests operating on BNSF's Peoria subdivision are more interesting, thanks to a variety of motive power and traffic, coal represents the largest volume and is what justified upgrades between 2008 and 2015. These upgrades included replacement of most remaining jointed rail with continuous welded rail and the installation of positive train control technology. At peak, the Peoria sub saw as many as 2 loaded coal trains per day, but declining coal usage has reduced this volume significantly. In the not-too-distant future, coal traffic is likely to disappear entirely. That is because both power plants to which coal trains using this line terminate are being forced to close. This 135-car train is bound for the Illinois and Midland Railroad, which will forward it to the Kincaid Generating Station southeast of Springfield. BNSF 9676 brings up the rear as distributed power unit. A train of coal empties rolls across West Farmington Road on Monday afternoon, September 27, 2021. None of the Peoria subdivision's longest passing sidings, located at Peoria, Edwards, and Gilson, can accommodate 135 car unit coal trains, or for that matter grain and feed trains which also use the line. Thus, it was impossible to stage meets for such long trains anywhere between Galesburg and Peoria. Only the typically short manifests could be put into those sidings. So it wasn't uncommon for unit coal, grain, and feed trains to be held at either terminal, waiting for one or more movements in the opposite direction to clear. No doubt this gave train dispatchers a lot of headaches when traffic levels were heavier. For a number of years now, BNSF has been moving unit trains of gluten feed pellets west from Peoria. Here on Easter Sunday, April 16, 2017, one of these trains crosses the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's Illinois River Bridge. Shortly after entering home rails, our feed train rounds the curve near the South Adams Street Viaduct on Peoria's far south edge. These trains are loaded at Archer Daniels Midland Company's expansive wet corn plant in Decatur. Canadian National delivers them to BNSF on the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's Pekin Double Track main. These trains seem to run weekly for most of the year, sometimes more, and are usually symboled GPEI SMR, or Grain Peoria to Summerfield, Texas, where an ADM grain company elevator supplies that region's cattle producers. Crossing Kickapoo Creek minutes later, locomotives 9238, 3994, and 4960 have 100 cars. Unseen are 7010 and 4282, which bring up the rear as distributed power units. Since 2008, BNSF's Peoria subdivision has periodically handled a number of trains hauling wind turbine components. Originating in Colorado, this blade train shown at Wesley on the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad September 21, 2021, was bound for interchange with the Illinois and Midland Railroad. Note the size of each blade spans more than two 89-foot flat cars, requiring a 60-foot flat in between as a spacer. Five days later, on September 26th, this train of nacelles and wind turbine tower sections, also from Colorado, rolls along the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's double-track Pekin main line en route to the Illinois and Midland Railroad. Although this traffic pales in comparison to coal tonnage, at least the railroads are tasked with handling components for renewable energy projects such as wind farms. A loaded grain train leaving Peoria on April 25, 2021 rounds the curve near the Adams Street Viaduct. BNSF Units 6417 and 5749 have 106 loads of corn. BNSF 5334 brought up the rear as distributed power unit. This was the first of several loaded grain trains received from the Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railway in 2021. It is bound for Hereford, Texas. Canadian National Railway's Peoria subdivision runs 110 miles from Mattoon northwest through Decatur to Pekin. This carrier's Peoria area trackage, shown in brown, ends at IC Junction in Pekin. Most of its trains use the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad to reach the East Peoria yard. Northbound local L556 operates Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. IC 1029 and SD 70, still wearing original Illinois Central black, pulls 41 cars across 5th Street near South Pekin shortly after sunset on Monday, July 19, 2021. 3 cars on the head end were for 2 Pekin customers, Ammerhart and Hannah Steele. They will be left at Pekin for southbound counterpart L557. Other typical traffic handled by this train includes scrap metal, grain products such as corn screenings and soybean flour, and chemicals such as sodium hydroxide solution and hydrochloric acid. Catching L556 here in daylight is impossible save for late spring and early summer, as the train leaves Decatur in mid to late afternoon. L556's Friday run flips at Pekin and returns south to Decatur. IC 1034 leads a 58-car local L557 across 5th Street near South Pekin late morning Tuesday, January 12, 2021. This train operates on Tuesdays and Thursdays, mornings or afternoons depending on crew availability. Typical traffic on today's train includes covered hoppers loaded with grain mash and a tank car loaded with carbon dioxide gas refrigerated liquid. A block of 26 plastic empties swelled the train's consist. A sprinkling of 8 empty gondolas shows that scrap metal traffic was moving at that time. Shortly, the train will slow for the siding at South Pekin, where it will grab 25 grain empties and pedal them to Grainland Cooperative's Emden elevator. L556 probably dropped them there the day before for L557 to handle. Customers are serviced by southbound L557 because industry spur switches face south. On Thursday, October 7, 2021, a Canadian National unit lettered for British Columbia Railway, BCOL 4647, and IC 1019 have just added 2 cars to their 34-car L557 at Pekin. These cars will be switched at 2 nearby customers. After pulling an empty, L557 shoves the lumber load into Ammerhart's building materials warehouse. Ammerhart opened this facility at Pekin's Riverway Business Park in 2006 after having been in Peoria for a number of years. The company needed more space, and Pekin had it. CN service was also a factor in relocation here. Finally, L557 shoves the steel coil load into Hanna Steel Corporation's Pekin Coating and Tube Mill facility. Hanna Steel opened here in 1999, giving then Illinois Central Railroad its first direct Pekin customer in years. It has 250,000 square feet of space and can process 300,000 tons of steel per year. There are also 2 tube mills on site. Like with Ammerhart, the switch faces south. It used to face north, but a 2009 road extension project required relocation. The 6 empties behind 4647 and 1019 had already been pulled from here. After the crew finishes spotting the load, they will be added to the train before heading south. This coal train, shown at 5th Street on June 21, 2015, came off the Union Pacific at Pekin. Union Pacific numbers 5858 and 5971 are on the point. It is on the last leg of its journey to Archer Daniels Midland Company's cogeneration plant in Decatur. This line's history traces back to the Pekin, Lincoln, and Decatur Railway, which completed a line between these points in 1871. The PL&D began leasing the Peoria and Springfield Railroad in 1878, securing an entrance into Peoria. A year later, the PL&D consolidated with the Decatur, Mattoon, and Southern to form the Peoria, Decatur, and Evansville Railway. In 1880, the PD&E was one of 4 carriers to form the Peoria and Pekin Union Railway. In 1900, the Illinois Central Railroad absorbed the PD&E. The Peoria district quickly became an important feeder into the Chicago-New Orleans main line of Mid-America at Mattoon. The Illinois Central Railroad and Gulf, Mobile, and Ohio Railway merged in 1972 to form the Illinois Central Gulf. The combination was never as successful as hoped, and much of the railroad's secondary routes were sold to newly created regional carriers in the mid and late 1980s. As most former GM&O lines had been sold or abandoned, the carrier reverted to its historic Illinois Central name in 1988. Canadian National Railway acquired the IC 11 years later. Reaching the end of our 125-car train, we see that Union Pacific number 7211 brings up the rear as distributed power unit. Numbers 54, 52, and 5476 lead a 100-car feed train across 5th Street on March 26, 2016. This was actually the Peoria local, then called L564. On some days, the daily locals crew handled a unit coal, feed, or grain train in one direction, and regular through and local traffic the other. Due to the volume of work done, crews often reached hours of service before completing their runs. This often led to operational problems as well as higher motel bills charged to the railroad. Beginning in spring 2019, L564 was reduced in frequency to Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and on weekends if traffic justified it. Another local, Clinton, Illinois-based L554 worked as needed up the Peoria sub from Mount Pulaski to switch local customers at Emden, Delavan, and Pekin. A year later, traffic was down, and L554 no longer made the side trip between Mount Pulaski and Pekin. The round-trip L564 had been replaced by northbound L556 and southbound L557. It must be noted that 1920s-era stick rail led to costly derailments in 2001 and 2002. The main line from Mattoon to Emden had already been laid with continuous welded rail, so a decision was made to replace the old worn stick rail all the way up to Pekin. The project was completed in 2004. It appears that CN saw a long future in its Peoria route. The Illinois and Midland Railroad main line from Springfield enters from the southwest. Shown in orange, it ends at IC Junction in Pekin. Not to be overlooked are the Powerton and Crescent yards, as well as railroad-owned and associated private industrial trackage. Beyond IC Junction, Illinois and Midland trains use sister Tazewell and Peoria Railroad to reach the East Peoria yard. The Illinois and Midland has trackage rights, though long dormant, on Union Pacific's Peoria subdivision from I&M Junction near Barr, northward and across the Illinois River to Summer. These trackage rights facilitated direct interchange of carload traffic there with both the Toledo, Peoria, and Western and Union Pacific. A unit coal train rolls through Forest City, Illinois on August 26, 2018. BNSF 6401 and City Rail 1307 are on the point. The Illinois and Midland Railroad's existence is tied to coal. Same for predecessor Chicago and Illinois Midland Railway. The line's history is an interesting one. The Havana to Pekin section was completed by the Illinois River Railroad in 1860. Financial problems, typical of early railroads, led to acquisition by the Peoria, Pekin, and Jacksonville Railroad, which completed a route to Peoria with an Illinois River crossing at Pekin in 1864. This line became Peoria's fourth railroad, and would be one of four which formed the Peoria and Pekin Union Railway. The Springfield to Havana section was completed for the Springfield and Northwestern Railroad in 1874. After a stint with the Wabash, St. Louis, and Pacific, this line and the PP&J came under Chicago, Peoria, and St. Louis control in 1887. The CP and STL generally struggled for the rest of its history. Federal management during and after the Great War left it in poor condition. Economic depression in the early 1920s only worsened its situation. The road sought wholesale abandonment before the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1923. The Commission agreed on condition that receivers try to sell the railroad as a whole. If unsuccessful, they were to attempt to sell it by segment. Only if that failed could they close down and scrap it. In 1926, Commonwealth Edison-owned CNIM gained control of the bankrupt Chicago, Peoria, and St. Louis Railroad's Springfield to Havana to Pekin route. Significant track upgrades and construction of a large new power plant, the present-day Powerton Generating Station, ensured the line's future for many decades to come. At this time, coal originated on the CNIM's original line between Taylorville and Simic. Eventually, coal from offline sources were added to the mix. Clean air legislation led to a shift from high-sulfur Illinois coal to Western coal in the 1970s. This meant the CNIM eventually received all coal from Western connections via the Peoria and Pekin Union Railway, delivering to the Powerton Generating Station and a coal transfer dock at Havana. In 1987, Commonwealth Edison sold the CNIM. Coal tonnage declined in the next several years. In 1996, Genesee and Wyoming's Illinois and Midland Railroad purchased the property, eventually building coal tonnage to levels not seen in many years. For more than a decade, coal as a source of electricity has been in decline due to a combination of economics, regulation, and lawsuits by environmental activists. A power plant at Havana quit receiving coal in late 2019. Another online power plant, the Kincaid Generating Station, is expected to close in 2027. Powerton may continue to operate for at least another decade, and probably longer. BNSF 6259 is distributed power unit of this 135-car coal train. Back to the immediate Peoria area, we see Illinois and Midland Railroad number 2108 pulling 8 cars past the historic former Chicago and Illinois Midland Depot in Pekin, July 20, 2021. The Illinois and Midland also runs transfers to and from the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's East Peoria yard. The sister short lines apparently alternate on handling this traffic. Most transfer business is consigned to and from Pekin area industries, however. So with comparatively little business south of Powerton, local train operations to and from Springfield tend to be infrequent and at times unpredictable. Because Illinois and Midland crews run BNSF and Union Pacific power through to the coal train's destinations, the road's own power is relegated to locals and yard jobs working industries. Here, IMRR number 2108 assembles a 22-car Springfield-bound local at the Powerton yard Saturday evening, June 16, 2018. Although it was one of the longest days of the year, the sun had set by the time 2108 departed south. As we watch the train run by, we can identify the first 6 cars as sodium bicarbonate loads for the Kincaid Generating Station. Then a plastic load for Springfield. 3 more sodium bicarbonate loads for Kincaid. 3 granulated slag empties for Harsco's Sicily plant. 9 ballast cars bring up the rear. These are probably bound for Havana. Let's follow a southbound local on Sunday afternoon, April 19, 2020. Illinois and Midland number 2084 pulls 7 cars across County Road 900 North near Manitou. A short time later, the train rolls through Manitou, a Mason County village of 1,500 residents. Industry tracks here serve a grain elevator and a loading platform. The southbound local visits Forest City, where industry tracks have had their switches removed after years of inactivity. One of these, Weaver Popcorn Company, used to ship grain from here to its processing plant in Van Buren, Indiana. Our train approaches Topeka, home to fewer than 100 residents. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, predecessor Chicago and Illinois Midland Railway emphasized local business to offset declining coal tonnage. Online grain elevators began shipping by rail for the first time in many years. Fertilizer traffic also returned. But by the time coal tonnage was revived under successor Illinois and Midland Railroad in the late 1990s, most of this local business had disappeared. Before leaving Havana, number 2084 has picked up a tank car, possibly from the transload used by Darling Ingredients. This facility was established in 2017 to load liquid products shipped from Darling's Mason City plant. On May 9, 2021, Illinois and Midland numbers 2108 and 2084 and Tazewell and Peoria numbers 2133 pull 60 wind turbine tower loads through Powerton Yard. Trains of wind turbine components began arriving from BNSF in late April. The Illinois and Midland hauled these to the former rail-to-barge coal transfer facility in Havana, where they were unloaded, stored, and then trucked to construction sites north of Mason City. TP&W number 3046 and Huron and Eastern number 2107 pull through Manitou on August 16, 2021 with 68 flat cars, which hold 27 wind turbine blades. Received from BNSF on the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's Pekin Main Line, this train is bound for Havana. Now we'll review area customers. A Union Pacific coal train unloads at NRG Energy's Powerton Generating Station. This plant is located on the west side of Illinois and Midland's Powerton and Crescent yards. Opened in 1928, the longtime Commonwealth Edison-owned facility saw significant expansion in the 1970s. It is by far the railroad's largest customer. Harsco's coal cinder processing plant is also located on the west side of the yard. Working towards Pekin, we see the American Milling Company, situated between Crystal Lake and the Illinois and Midland Railroad main line. This feed mill began operations in 1985. American Milling operates a railroad-owned barge loadout across Crystal Lake. Products are dumped from rail cars using this former railroad bridge seen in the distance. Also adjacent Crystal Lake, Agridyne LLC blends corn and soy-based products into liquid feed supplements for cattle. The plant is largely hidden from public view, but is a significant customer for the Illinois and Midland. The Iowa Interstate Railroad's Peoria subdivision, shown in red, runs 42.7 miles from Bureau Junction south to a point just short of the north limit yard in Peoria. Most of its trains now use the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's East Peoria Yard or double-track Pekin Main as their terminus. Iowa Interstate number 519 pulls a 102-car PESI by Detweiler Park Thursday, June 22, 2021. PESI is an as-needed manifest which runs from Peoria to Silvis, Illinois, which is near the Quad Cities. The Iowa Interstate Railroad owns or operates through lease or trackage rights the old Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad's Chicago to Council Bluffs main line and the Peoria branch. Known as the Peoria subdivision, it runs from Bureau Junction to Peoria. It was the city's first operational railroad when a Peoria and Bureau Valley train arrived on November 7, 1854. The construction contractor handed over this line to the Chicago and Rock Island Railroad Company on February 1, 1855. Westward expansion prompted the Rock Island to add Pacific to its name in 1866. The carrier prospered for many years until the early 20th century, but from 1902 new owners bled the company's finances through unsustainable expansion. Consequently, it was forced into bankruptcy in 1914, lasting 3 years. The Great Depression forced the carrier into its second and longest bankruptcy, from June 1933 until January 1, 1948. By the late 1950s, secondary status in many major markets, regulation, truck competition, and dependence on agricultural products put the Rock Island on a downward spiral from which it would not recover. Its third and final bankruptcy came in 1975. The bankruptcy court ordered liquidation in 1980. The Iowa Interstate was created in 1984 to operate trackage acquired by a shippers consortium. By this time, the Peoria line had been operated in whole or in segments by 4 different carriers, but continued to be owned by the Rock Island estate. The Henry to Peoria segment had been mostly dormant and in danger of abandonment in 1985 when it was purchased by B.F. Goodrich, which operated a chemical plant in Henry. The Iowa Interstate was chosen as its operator and began service in June 1987. It took 2 years to bring the line up to decent shape. The Iowa Interstate purchased the Henry to Peoria segment at the end of 2006. Heavy track work took place in 2010, enabling it to handle higher capacity rolling stock. When looking at it today, one is amazed to know that sections were dormant for several years, weed-choked, with washouts, and with missing rails. The Iowa Interstate has done an excellent job bringing this line back to life. Iowa Interstate number 504, running Long Hood forward, pulls a 72-car SIPE through the old Sankote station area near Peoria Heights on October 8, 2021. This as-needed manifest alphabetic symbol denotes that it runs from Silvis to Peoria. This one is typical of most SIPE trains. Grain mash loads usually make up most of the consist. Other traffic includes gluten feed, gluten meal, corn germ, corn screenings, soybean oil, tallow, potash, and scrap metal. Most of the grain product traffic originates at ADM Cedar Rapids, Iowa facilities. When the upper Mississippi River closes to commercial navigation in winter, ADM's Clinton, Iowa plant begins sending grain products via the Iowa Interstate to the Peoria area for transfer to barges. These ADM facilities are served by other carriers, but the Iowa Interstate directly serves ethanol plants at Council Bluffs, Atlantic and Dexter, Iowa, and CHS at Anawan, Illinois. All send some of their output of grain mash or distillers' dried grains to Peoria and Pekin area barge loadouts as markets demand. The Bureau Switcher, or BUSW, is a Bureau Junction-based weekday job serving the Peoria subdivision's customers at Henry and Chillicothe. At the latter, Galena Road Gravel Company transloads construction sand from trucks to rail cars for shipment to an Ozinga-owned ready-mix facility in Mokena. On August 15, 2018, Iowa Interstate numbers 707 and 711 shove empty hoppers into the customer's siding. The Bureau Switcher crew is sometimes called to handle manifest or potash trains on the Peoria subdivision. Iowa Interstate 702 and 707 pull 114 cars northbound a few miles out of Peoria on July 22, 2021. All were empty but these 5 steel coil loads shown on the rear. This traffic is received from Norfolk Southern at the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's East Peoria yard. They are consigned to a transload at Altoona, Iowa. Iowa Interstate numbers 152 and 502 roll through Mossville, Illinois with 101 potash loads February 1st, 2020. Carrying alphabetic symbol DAVPE, these trains operate as needed, but are most frequently seen from late summer through early spring. The loads originate in Saskatchewan on the Canadian Pacific Railway, which delivers them to the Iowa Interstate in Davenport, Iowa, hence the train symbol. As shown in the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad section of this video, the typically 100-plus car trains are consigned to Mosaic Crop Nutrition's warehouse and barge loadouts south of Bartonville. Empties return north as PEDAV. NS Motors 8376, 9589, and 2702 pull 85 grain empties north through Chillicothe on September 17, 2018. Since 2012, the Iowa Interstate has periodically acted as haulage agent for Norfolk Southern grain trains between Des Moines, Iowa and Peoria. Empties are received at Wesley or East Peoria on the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad and forwarded to the Iowa capital for loading. Typically, 85 or 86 cars of corn return to NS at East Peoria, bound for southeastern processors or feedlots. Iowa Interstate's Rock Island Heritage Unit, number 513, leads a 27-car PESI past the old Rock Island Depot in downtown Peoria, March 28, 2016. A short time later, 513 passes the newer Rock Island Depot at Morton Street. The crimson and black rocket freight colors were common from the late 1940s into the early 1960s. This unit arrived on the property in January 2010. Note also that the Iowa Interstate uses its own version of the Rock Island's historic beaver pelt shield emblem on its locomotive fleet. Iowa Interstate number 516, delivered in February 2015, commemorates the railroad's 30th anniversary, which was celebrated the prior November. The unit pulls a 62-car PESI north of Chillicothe on April 1, 2015. The colors are very similar to what the Rock Island used from 1969 to 1974. The Keokuk Junction Railway operates between Keokuk, Iowa and East Peoria. Its main line, shown in yellow, enters from the west. Ownership ends at Hollis. East of Hollis, the KJRY has trackage rights on a 5-mile Union Pacific owned but TP&W maintained line. Interchange with the TP&W and Union Pacific takes place at Collier Yard in Bartonville. KJRY reaches the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad at Iowa Junction. From here they run to the East Peoria Yard, where there is access to multiple connecting lines. A trio of GP20s owned by Keokuk Junction Railway parent Pioneer Lines pulls 34 cars eastward out of Mapleton on August 26, 2021. Some of these cars will be left for the Union Pacific at Collier Yard in Bartonville. The rest are bound for interchange to Norfolk Southern at the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's East Peoria Yard. The Keokuk Junction Railway was founded in 1981 to purchase trackage formerly operated by the defunct Chicago, Rock Island, and Pacific Railroad. This trackage primarily served the Hubbinger Company, a large corn processor now owned by Roquette America. In late 1986, the KJRY expanded when it acquired from the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, then former TP&W trackage from Keokuk to La Harpe. The carrier expanded again when it acquired TP&W trackage between La Harpe and Lomax in December 2001 and from La Harpe to Hollis in February 2005. Owned and operated trackage now totals 126 miles. The last 20 cars, owned by Heartland Rail LLC, were online for some mechanical work done at La Harpe. They are bound for interchange to Union Pacific. The Keokuk Junction Railway was most famous for using an ABA set of F units in regular freight service. Number 1750 and 1752, both FP9s, were built for Canadian National Railway in the mid-1950s, subsequently working for Via Rail Canada and Algoma Central Railway before being sold to Pioneer in 2003. They entered freight service on the KJRY in 2007. Number 1761, an F9B, was built for CN in the same period. Like the others, it served with Via Rail Canada and Algoma Central Railway before being sold to Pioneer. This unit entered service with the KJRY in 2010. Here on September 1st, 2017, numbers 1752, 1761, and 1750 pull 44 cars through Iowa Junction and enter the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad for the trip to East Peoria. Freshly painted SW 1500, number 1500, is fourth unit en route to a new home. Our F-unit trio has departed the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's East Peoria yard with a short train of just 7 cars. It is approaching the Illinois River Lift Bridge. The KJRY's purchase of the TP&W's West End in 2005 enabled Keokuk, Iowa Industries, namely Roquette America, to revive eastbound routings via Peoria connections. Most traffic consists of corn germ consigned to ADM's West Plant grain oil refinery in Decatur, Illinois, and corn syrup to various beverage and confectionery firms in the eastern states. Such traffic had withered with Norfolk Southern's service meltdown following the 1999 Conrail split, the sale in late 2000 of the West End to A&K Railroad Materials, and finally a service embargo by A&K's operating subsidiary, SF&L Railway, in 2002. The line lay mostly dormant for more than 2 years. Colorado-based BRX Transportation Holdings completed its acquisition of Pioneer Rail Corp. At the end of July 2019. In the first of many changes, new management sidelined the F units and offered them for sale. Number 1752 was already in the shop needing replacement wheels. The other two made their final trip to East Peoria on August 6th of that year, then led a final westbound run to La Harpe the next day. With those classic units retired from active freight service, the Keokuk Junction Railway had to rely on its venerable GP20 fleet. On May 14, 2021, 2003, 2035, and 2047 led 32 cars westbound out of Mapleton. After all these years of operation by the Keokuk Junction Railway, it is hard to believe this route once hosted lengthy merchandise trains heavy with bridge traffic moving between the Santa Fe at Fort Madison, Iowa, and Conrail at Logansport, Indiana. Perhaps even more difficult to believe is that TP&W operated regular intermodal trains, including double stacks, through here until early 2001. Fortunately, the KJRY has done a good job rebuilding business even in the face of near disaster, such as the loss of its Spoon River crossing to a derailment in September 2013. A replacement bridge was not in service until 8 months later, in May 2014. Unfortunately for visiting rail fans, operations are unpredictable, with Mapleton-based local trains typically arriving from La Harpe one day, making an East Peoria turn the second, followed by a westbound run to La Harpe on the third. A second weekly round trip may operate if grain traffic and storage car business justifies it. But what day of the week is key? While it is great to see GP20s still working after 6 decades, nothing lasts forever. Since October 2021, the Keokuk Junction Railway has been using this pair of GP20Ds leased from CIT Equipment Finance for its Mapleton-based local trains. Rebuilt from GP20s by EMD in 2000, CEFX 2014 and CEFX 2022 are powered by Caterpillar 3516 prime movers. This 21-car East Peoria turn is shown crossing the Illinois River on November 30, 2021. In our final view of KJRY operations, we see the pair of GP20Ds shoving a gondola into Collier Yard in Bartonville on October 22, 2021. The crew will pull 18 cars and add them to its Mapleton-bound train. This was an unusually large receipt from the Union Pacific. The KJRY also interchanges here with the Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railway. It should be noted that the gondola, received from Norfolk Southern, holds scrap metal for Hitchcock Scrapyard's transload operation in Canton, which is this short line's closest active customer to the Peoria area. Norfolk Southern's Bloomington district runs from Beemant north to Gibson City, then west through Bloomington Normal to the Peoria area. Shown in purple, it ends with a connection to the Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railway's Peoria subdivision at Farmdale. A short stretch of the TP&W's Peoria sub is used to reach the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad at P&PU Junction. Manifest trains use the East Peoria yard, but unit trains originate and terminate on the Nickel Plate Division or the double-track Pekin Main Line. Norfolk Southern Railway Local D49 slowly approaches the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's East Peoria yard on a wintry Monday morning, February 22, 2021. SD40E number 6343 and SD60E number 7014 lead 46 cars. All are empty, which is typical, though scrap metal and steel coil traffic do appear somewhat regularly on the inbound trains. Today's train is lengthier than other days because the weekend extra, usually called D47, didn't run. This job, which is based at Goodyard in Normal, is on duty at 6 a.m. Monday through Friday. It usually makes an East Peoria turn late mornings, returning home by early to mid-afternoon. D49 receives traffic from local D32, which runs from Decatur to Normal daily. Counterpart D36, to which D49 delivers at Normal, also runs daily to Decatur. On the return trip the same day, numbers 7014 and 6343 climb toward Crandall Junction with 19 cars, mostly loads. Note the 4 Caterpillar D10T and D11 tractor loads on the head end. These are followed by a carload of liquid sodium gluconate, then alcohol loads and scrap metal empties. Then another block of alcohol loads. Coiled wire rod from Liberty Steel and Wire is noticeably absent from today's train. Ducking under the TP&W's Farmdale Trestle on May 24, 2021, numbers 7032 and 3338 lead a more typical outbound consist. 4 Komatsu truck chassis loads, coiled wire rod from Liberty Steel and Wire, carbon dioxide refrigerated liquid, more coiled wire rod from Liberty, coil steel empties, corn syrup loads, and more carbon dioxide refrigerated liquid and alcohol loads on the rear. This train had 31 cars. Numbers 9320, 9484, and 9349 duck under the TP&W's Farmdale Trestle on August 10, 2019, with 83 cars of corn for a southeast destination. The NS periodically runs unit grain trains from Des Moines to southeast processors and feedlots. The Iowa Interstate Railroad acts as haulage agent for these trains between the Iowa capital and Peoria. Trains began running in 2012. Extensive storm damage to Iowa's corn crop in 2020 and a poor 2021 harvest in the northern plains have suspended these movements for the time being. Traffic on Norfolk Southern's Bloomington district has seen many cycles since its beginning. Its history traces back to the Lake Erie and Western Railroad, which extended its Sandusky, Ohio to Bloomington line to Wesley City, across the river from Peoria, in 1888. The LE&W was controlled by the New York Central System from 1900 to 1922, when it was sold to the New York, Chicago, and St. Louis. Known as the Nickel Plate Road, this carrier also acquired the Toledo, St. Louis, and Western Railroad that year and combined them in 1923. The newly expanded Nickel Plate emphasized the Peoria Gateway, building interchange business from Western connections. The Nickel Plate's Peoria division, which ran west from Frankfort, Indiana, suffered like most lines during the Great Depression, but the end of Prohibition and government purchases of Caterpillar Tractor Company products brought much needed business to this line. The Nickel Plate was absorbed by the Norfolk and Western Railway in 1964. The Wabash was a third component in this merger, and the railroad sales offices emphasized its Kansas City gateway over Peoria. On June 1, 1982, Norfolk and Western and Southern Railway formed parent Norfolk Southern Corporation, but did not formally combine operations until the end of 1990. By then, the Norfolk and Western had abandoned the old Nickel Plate east of Gibson City and created the Bloomington district by combining the former Wabash from Bement to Gibson City and the former Nickel Plate west to East Peoria. Traffic surged when heavy interchange with BNSF shifted from Chicago to Peoria in 1995, but this dried up after the 1999 Conrail split. From 2014 to 2016, the Iowa Interstate interchanged unit ethanol trains to NS at Peoria. In reverse, NS delivered empty ethanol trains or manifests made up of mostly ethanol empties. Coal and grain traffic has come and gone, but the Bloomington district can handle more traffic should it materialize in coming years. 9 active common carriers serve the area, but there is a 10th inactive line which belongs to the city of Peoria. Shown in light blue, it runs from Union Pacific's Peoria subdivision east for 2 miles to Pioneer Industrial Park. A south end is shown in broken lines because it is mostly inaccessible, with some sections removed and grade crossings paved. The city of Peoria purchased Union Pacific's Pioneer Industrial Lead in 2001 to reconfigure rail service to Pioneer Park, hoping it would free up the Keller branch for recreational trail development. These views were taken from Radnor Road in late 2021. This trackage was built by the Chicago and Northwestern in 1962. Construction on a connection across North University Street to the Keller branch began in late 2004, but was not completed for another year. Revenue operations began in March 2006. This view of what is left of the Keller branch across Pioneer Parkway offers much evidence of disuse. One rail has been removed, and the right-of-way is choked with vegetation. The last movement on this trackage was in 2019. As for what is left on the south end, its junction with the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad near Spring Street remains intact. But the last customer, O'Brien Steel Service Company, has removed track sections on its property and blocked off the right-of-way with steel and concrete barriers. This section still runs in a northwesterly direction for about 1 mile, but it has no future. There is considerable complexity to area trackage owned and operated by the Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railway, so we will show each segment followed by a sample of action on that segment. Shown in orange, the main line runs from Logansport, Indiana west to East Peoria. Manifest or M trains typically operate 2 or 3 cycles a week between East Peoria and Effner Yard at the Indiana state line. On November 29, 2020, TP&W numbers 3442, 5008, and 2070 pulled 57 cars westbound through Eureka, which is a few miles east of the map area. Most cars appear to be empties used for such commodities as nitrogen fertilizer solution, alcohol, coiled wire rod or steel billets, and potash. There are, however, 2 blocks of tank cars containing molten petroleum asphalt. Construction on then Peoria and Oquawka Eastern Extension started at present-day East Peoria in 1855. Crews graded the line and laid track eastward, reaching the Illinois Central's charter line at El Paso by late summer 1856, and the Chicago and Alton at Chenoa in early 1857. A connection with the Toledo, Logansport, and Burlington had been completed at the Indiana state line in December 1859. Meanwhile, the area's first railroad bridge across the Illinois River opened on April 15, 1857. This provided connections with Peoria's other lines, Rock Island's Peoria and Bureau Valley north to Bureau, then east to Chicago or west to the Quad Cities, and the Peoria and Oquawka route west to Galesburg and Burlington, Iowa. The Peoria and Oquawka Eastern Extension was operated by the Logansport, Peoria, and Burlington Railroad from 1861 to 1864, when it was sold to the newly organized Toledo, Peoria, and Warsaw Railway. On December 5, 2021, an eastbound M train rolls by Grainland Cooperative's Kruger elevator with numbers 5009 and 3440 leading 64 cars. Traffic this day includes plastic pellets, nitrogen fertilizer solution, no fewer than 6 boxcars loaded with bagged salt, a dozen brand new covered hoppers for Inco Brasa Industries Gilman soybean crushing facility, steel billets, and alcohol. Getting back to the TP&W's history, the company completed a line between Pekin Junction, now known as Hollis, and Warsaw on the Mississippi River by fall 1868. A bridge spanning the river opened to traffic in 1871, enabling TP&W to begin service between Hamilton, Illinois and Keokuk, Iowa. Another line was built from La Harpe to a connection with the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad at Lomax in 1871. Trackage rights enabled TP&W to serve Burlington, Iowa. To connect the eastern and western divisions, TP&W trains used the Peoria, Pekin, and Jacksonville line between Hollis and Peoria. The PP&J was one of 4 carriers to form the Peoria and Pekin Union Railway in 1880. The TP&W was another. Peoria yard facilities were leased to P&PU, which provided switching and terminal line functions. Just prior, it should be noted, the old TP&W was sold under foreclosure to the Toledo, Peoria, and Western Railroad Company. Simultaneously, the property was leased to the Wabash, St. Louis, and Pacific. This lasted for 5 years. The TP&W struggled for much of its early history. Joint ownership by CB&Q and Pennsylvania Railroads beginning in 1894 proved disastrous, as TP&W lines were eventually relegated to local business. Another period of receivership lasted from 1917 to 1927, interrupted only by federal management brought about by the First World War. In 1926, New York businessman George P. McNear purchased the line and incorporated a new TP&W in 1927. He modernized its equipment, upgraded track, and ended operations over the CB&Q to Burlington, Iowa. In its place, a connection was built with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway at Lomax, enabling TP&W salesmen to solicit bridge traffic to and from the Pennsylvania Railroad at Effner. This new role helped the carrier prosper during the 1930s Great Depression. The East Peoria Yard is the railroad's base for area operations. Before entering the yard on May 16, 2021, this TP&W crewed BNSF grain train runs across the Farmdale Trestle, which was built in 1950 as part of a flood mitigation project. In this view looking east from the US 150 bridge, numbers 5015 and 1539 are on the point of what appears to be a local train. To support growing traffic volume, President George P. McNear built this larger classification yard at East Peoria. Equipped with a turntable and locomotive shop, car repair facilities, and other support structures, the new yard opened in July 1928. At present, crews and locomotives are still based here, but diesel shop functions have moved to the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's Creve Coeur facilities. The yard is mostly intact, but is far larger than the carrier's present needs. 3 tracks on the south side are used for car storage. TP&W serves a few customers at or near its East Peoria yard. Immediately to the east is East Peoria Materials and Rail Yard, which is used primarily by the Rogers Group's Newton County Stone Company for limestone shipped from its quarry near Kentland, Indiana. On this day, June 22, 2020, shipments of rock salt from Detroit, Michigan were being unloaded. Carry Scharf Trucking uses this facility as well. On the north side of the yard is a team track used to spot inbound lumber loads. Since early 2015, TP&W has delivered lumber to Morton Buildings here rather than directly to its truss manufacturing plant on Morton's west side. The main line west of the yard is called the Peoria Subdivision. Numbers 1538 and 2070 pull 8 cars along the Peoria subdivision toward the East Peoria yard on August 11, 2021. This was a transfer with traffic pulled from the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's nearby yard. 4 boxcars on the head end were laden with bagged salt and consigned to Sweetener Supply Corporation's new facility near Wolcott, Indiana. These are followed by 2 tank cars laden with inedible beef tallow, one containing methyl chloride, and then one loaded with beverage alcohol. All but the last car arrived East Peoria on BNSF. The first 3 tank cars are for Mapleton Industries. TP&W owns and operates the Morton Industrial Lead, a remnant of Santa Fe's Pekin District. Access is via trackage rights on Norfolk Southern's Bloomington District between East Peoria and Crandall. On November 6, 2019, TP&W number 2070 pulled 5 empty herbicide tank cars from Fork Transfer Company, which is the line's only active customer. Business here is seasonal and operations are sporadic, usually no more than once or twice a month, if at all. After pulling empties, the TP&W crew runs around them on a siding in Morton, then shoves out of town. Here at Crandall, they pull through the connection onto a Norfolk Southern siding. Moving off and back on to the NS main line requires a seesaw movement because the west end of the NS siding here is out of service. After enduring 10-mile-per-hour operation on the Morton Industrial Lead, TP&W 2070 cruises along Norfolk Southern's Bloomington District downhill toward East Peoria. TP&W locals distributing and gathering area interchange and industrial traffic use trackage rights on sister Tazewell and Peoria Railroad between P&P Junction in East Peoria and Iowa Junction on Peoria's far south side. Let's follow an East Peoria switcher on September 2nd, 2021. 2 units borrowed from sister Huron and Eastern in Michigan, numbers 3485 and 2107, are running westbound on the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad, about to diverge left onto the Nickel Plate Division. Behind them are 23 loads for Mapleton, 16 cars with dry fertilizer, mostly potash, 2 tallow loads, 1 of methyl chloride, and 4 more with tallow. The TP&W has been using this route for over half a century, starting shortly after its own Illinois River Bridge was severely damaged after being hit by a barge the morning of February 12, 1970. At first, Peoria and Pekin Union Railway pilots ran TP&W trains between P&PU Junction in East Peoria and Iowa Junction in Peoria. Eventually, TP&W entered into a trackage rights agreement with P&PU, enabling its own qualified crews to make this run. The P&PU relationship has had its share of drama over the years, but that is past now that P&PU's successor, Tazewell and Peoria Railroad, and TP&W are under common control. Back to the present day, our train is approaching the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's Illinois River Bridge. Moments later, it nears the crossing of ADM's Riverside Track and Bridge Junction, where it will diverge left. Our train crosses West Clark Street on Peoria's far south edge as it slows for Iowa Junction. Here, TP&W trains enter Union Pacific's 5-mile-long former Peoria Terminal Company line to Hollis. Operation on Union Pacific's 5-mile Iowa Junction to Hollis line is through trackage rights, but it is shown as a solid line because TP&W controls access and is responsible for maintenance. TP&W number 3046 pulls 14 grain empties from ADM South Yard on April 5, 2021. The year 2021 marks 40 years since TP&W gained access via Iowa Junction to Archer Daniels Midland Company's Riverside Track. Grain volume shipped here from online Illinois and Indiana elevators isn't as heavy as it once was, but regular deliveries do still occur for most of the year. Besides ADM, TP&W can serve 3 other firms located on this line: Peoria Barge Terminal, Interstate Asphalt Corporation's Peoria River Terminal, and Seneca Petroleum Company. It has been a number of years, however, since it has provided service to any of these, and apparently it has never served Seneca Petroleum. TP&W 5008 Huron and Eastern 3485 and TP&W 5010 shove loads through the connection at Bridge Junction and into the South Yard on March 7, 2021. Shortly after delivering loads, our trio shoves empties out of the yard through the connection and onto the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad main line so they can pull across the river and return home. Since Genesee and Wyoming acquired the TP&W in late December 2012, arrangements for serving ADM South Yard have become more flexible. Now TP&W primarily uses the Bridge Junction connection when serving this customer, which saves time over having to run via Iowa Junction. After pulling a coal straggler from Collier Yard, BNSF 6169 shoves it into a waiting coal train on December 9, 2021. Since January 2018, TP&W has been delivering BNSF coal trains to Vistra Energy's Edwards Power Station, just south of Bartonville. Unfortunately, this plant is scheduled to close at the end of 2022. The loss, however, will be felt most by BNSF, which hauls the coal from Wyoming's Powder River Basin. As this coal train crawls along, let's continue our history. George P. McNear and the railroad's unions often clashed over various issues, leading to bitter strikes in 1929 into 1930, 1941, which resulted in a federal takeover, and again in 1945. The last ended after McNear was murdered on March 10, 1947. McNear's successor, J. Russell Coulter, quickly revived the carrier's local, interline, and bridge traffic. Better yet, labor management relations improved considerably during his tenure as president. He also promoted online industrial development, particularly at East Peoria and Mapleton. So the TP&W's best years were in the 1950s and 1960s. Then in 1970, 3 major setbacks befell the carrier: the loss of its Illinois River Bridge, the Crescent City wreck, and the Penn Central bankruptcy. Signs of stress were already apparent as mergers involving TP&W's interchange partners had resulted in steady traffic losses since the early 1960s. Online industrial development could only offset so much of this loss. The final blow came in mid-1981 when Penn Central's successor, Conrail, canceled through rates with TP&W, resulting in the loss of almost all bridge traffic. The Santa Fe had already acquired Penn Central's half ownership, thus becoming TP&W's sole owner. Declining traffic and red ink led to absorption into the Santa Fe at the end of 1983. Operation by Santa Fe of the former TP&W proved unsatisfactory, and the carrier was offered for sale. The Keokuk Junction Railway acquired the La Harpe-Keokuk branch in late 1986. The rest was sold to a reborn TP&W in February 1989. As evening daylight fades, BNSF 9201 and BNSF 5849 bring up the rear of this coal train. Just outside of Bartonville on March 8, 2020, TP&W 5010 pulls 17 cars along the Union Pacific's 5-mile Iowa Junction to Hollis line. This train is the Colby Local, which is operating the return leg to Mapleton. The TP&W has been using this line since July 1928. Then owner Peoria Terminal Company used it to reach Pekin. When the river crossing was damaged by severe flooding in early 1973, the PT continued serving Pekin, but via trackage rights on the Peoria and Pekin Union Railway. Years of deferred maintenance by PT owner Rock Island forced TP&W to pour its own funds into track rehabilitation in 1973. When the Rock Island shut down in 1980, TP&W provided directed service as authorized by the Interstate Commerce Commission. A year later, it was replaced by the Chicago and Northwestern, but retained trackage rights. In 1982, it tried to purchase this line, but lost to the CNNW's higher bid. The only track TP&W owns west of the Illinois River is the Colby Industrial Spur at Mapleton. Trackage rights on the Keokuk Junction Railway between Hollis and Colby Junction are used to reach the Colby Spur. Finally, TP&W uses a connection with Union Pacific at Summer to access Vistra Energy's Edwards Power Station. On July 24, 2021, we see a Mapleton-bound extra job at Hollis. TP&W numbers 2056 and 1538 were pulling 17 cars along the Keokuk Junction Railway. The last 10 cars were added at Collier Yard in Bartonville. Note that the passing siding and main line switch sides here. The track behind the train is the Hollis Pass, most of which is the sole surviving section of the Peoria, Hannah City and Western Railway Company, which operated from 1919 until 1931, when it was acquired by the Peoria Terminal Company. This short line, built to serve several coal mines in the area, was abandoned in 1951. In 1952, TP&W purchased 1 mile here for use as a siding. Back to our train of March 8, 2020, TP&W 5010 shoves 17 cars across Wheeler Road using the west Y of the Colby Industrial Spur. The east Y can be seen in the distance. This road is the line between Keokuk Junction Railway and TP&W ownership. On the Colby Industrial Spur itself, TP&W serves several large customers. The first is Evonik Industries' specialty chemicals plant, which is the destination for all of those tallow tank cars. Ingredion hydrogenates corn syrup to manufacture sugarless sweeteners such as sorbitol. Lonza operates a smaller specialty chemicals plant here as well. Caterpillar's Mapleton foundry is believed to have rail access intact, but has not used it in several years. Growmark's Mapleton terminal handles dry fertilizer, including potash, phosphate, and urea. TP&W receives loaded BNSF coal trains on the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's Pekin Main Line or at the Illinois and Midland Railroad's Powerton and Crescent yards. Let's follow a coal train which ran on January 27, 2018. BNSF 6039 is preparing to depart Wesley with 135 cars. Minutes after departure, it crosses the Illinois River. Here it crosses Dar Street on Peoria's south side. Crossing West Clark Street, it will soon exit the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad and enter Union Pacific-owned trackage at Iowa Junction. Passing Collier Yard in Bartonville. These coal trains have the option of using the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's parallel Kickapoo main, but using the old Peoria terminal line here seems to be the normal routine. With the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's parallel Kickapoo main in the background, our train crawls along the 10-mile-per-hour ex-Peoria terminal line. The train has entered the Keokuk Junction Railway siding at Hollis. It will pull to Mapleton for headroom, allow vehicle traffic on Route 9 to clear, and then make a reverse move through the connection at Summer onto Union Pacific's Peoria subdivision. Vistra Energy's Edwards Power Station can be seen in the background as BNSF 9067 and BNSF 8813 lead the train along the Union Pacific main line. Yet another reverse move is required to reach the power plant. Although such operations involve complex movements, TP&W crews handle these trains quite efficiently. A final note is that while TP&W holds trackage rights on BNSF's Peoria subdivision to Galesburg, these have been dormant since June 2011. As with the TP&W, complexity requires we explore Union Pacific's Peoria area operations by segment. The Peoria subdivision runs from Nelson south 141 miles to Barr. From there, trackage rights on the Illinois and Midland Railroad provide a link with Union Pacific's Springfield subdivision at Springfield. Shown in yellow, our first segment runs south to Peoria Junction. It is double-tracked for 5.5 miles from Pioneer to Pottstown. At Pioneer on August 25, 2016, a southbound Powerton coal train running main number 1 is approaching the descending grade of the double track. Union Pacific numbers 3969 and 6544 are on the point of the 135-car train. In the distance, a northbound ballast conveyor train waits on main number 2. The Chicago and Northwestern was the last steam road to build a new route to Peoria. Construction commenced on the Nelson to Peoria line in 1901 and service began in January 1902. The railroad subsequently built a short line to serve coal mines in Macoupin County, located between Springfield and St. Louis. The CN&W relied on the Chicago and Alton Railroad for connecting service. When this proved unsatisfactory, the CN&W announced plans for a new line from Peoria, 87 miles, to a connection with the Macoupin County Railway at Girard. Construction began in 1912. and the new line became fully operational by late 1913. A 5-span lift bridge crossed the Illinois River just south of Pekin. A classification yard was built south of there, which became South Pekin. Heavy northbound coal drags required helpers when ascending Pioneer Hill. Steam locomotives waited at Adams Street Yard for each train and cut off at the top of the hill. They returned engine light to Adams Street to wait for the next train. These extra movements caused congestion, so in 1923 the CN&W double-tracked the line from a point near Limestone, south of present-day Farmington Road, north to Pioneer. An automatic block signal system was installed between Pioneer and Kickapoo Junction, now known as Peoria Junction. Subsequent extension of the Southern Illinois line brought it to within 3 miles of the Litchfield and Madison Railway, a 44-mile line nicknamed the St. Louis Gateway Route. The carrier agreed to have the CN&W build a connection in 1926. This enabled the CN&W to run 2 pair of daily merchandise trains between Chicago and the St. Louis area at the start of 1927. The CN&W suffered like most roads during the Great Depression. Receivership lasted from 1935 to 1944. The Nelson to Southern Illinois route was dieselized in 1948. Coal tonnage from Macoupin County mines had played out by the early 1950s. By then, the Southern Illinois line's merchandise traffic had increased in importance. The CN&W purchased the Litchfield and Madison Railway on January 1, 1958, creating single-line service to the St. Louis Gateway. Absorption of the larger Minneapolis and St. Louis Railway and Chicago Great Western Railroad in 1960 and 1968, respectively, diverted not only merchandise traffic, but also a large volume of grain to the SI line. In the early 1980s, the CN&W purchased several hundred miles of trackage from the failed Rock Island. Access to the Powder River Basin added much coal tonnage system-wide. This included the old SI, which by then was known as the St. Louis Subdivision. Although the carrier prospered, its independence ended as Union Pacific sought to protect its important interchange partner. The CN&W became a UP subsidiary on April 25, 1995. Operational integration took place on October 1st of that year. On Monday, June 29, 2020, numbers 8687 and 5517 pull a 68-car train MCLPE down Main Number 1 across Reservoir Boulevard. Alphabetic symbol MCLPE stands for Manifest, Clinton, Iowa to Peoria, Illinois. These trains run on Mondays and Thursdays. The crew of LPD-01, also known as the Peoria Way Freight, is aboard, having grabbed the train from Edelstein Siding, where it had tied up before sunrise. One reason for this may be that the line into Peoria needed to be clear for a loaded or empty Decatur coal train to pass. Otherwise, it is rare to catch MCLPE in daylight. Typical loads include tallow for Evonik Industries at Mapleton via the TP&W, scrap metal for Liberty Steel and Wire in Bartonville, molten petroleum asphalt for Interstate Asphalt, and corn syrup for P&P Fermentation Products in Peoria via the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad. Grain mash, chemical, alcohol, and wire rod empties are also on this train, returning for more loads. Merchandise or manifest freight traffic on this line has changed considerably since the Union Pacific absorbed the Chicago and Northwestern in 1995, whereas the CNNW typically carted 2 daily freights in each direction. 2 weekly cycles suffice for existing business. 4 units, numbers 6822, 6506, 5997, and 7303, pull 135 coal empties through Pottstown and up Pioneer Hill on November 28, 2014. This was believed to have been the first Union Pacific coal train for ADM's Decatur cogeneration facility. It arrived loaded a week earlier and was forwarded to Decatur by Canadian National. This train, which seems to run several times per month, now uses more modern bathtub gondolas. Train MPECL, the alphabetic symbol for Manifest, Peoria, Illinois to Clinton, Iowa, rolls across West Farmington Road late afternoon Tuesday, August 3, 2021. A single locomotive, UP 7843, and just 22 cars make up this train. While short trains are common, consists can swell up to 60 or more cars on some days. Numbers 7601 and 3915 pull 110 grain loads across West Farmington Road late afternoon Friday, November 5, 2021. Unit grain trains such as these run the length of the Peoria subdivision, usually originating at Sterling on the east-west Geneva sub-main line. Typical destinations are in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Texas. UP number 7014 brings up the rear as distributed power unit. On Friday, December 17, 2021, UP 5394 pulls a 30-car train MPECL shortly after leaving Adams Street Yard. The 6th car is a Caterpillar D11 tractor load for export, traffic which only occasionally shows up on this train. The car had been blocked onto Tuesday's train, but had to be set out due to a no-pass restriction. At Manlius, 56 miles north, a train occupied the passing track there, leaving no room for high and wide loads such as this D11. So it had to wait to move until Friday's train, by which time the restriction had been lifted. Other traffic includes a boxcar of locomotive wheels from the Keokuk Junction Railway, and alcohol and grain mash from the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad. Corn syrup, asphalt, and tallow empties are also notable. Although this MPECL was a short one, the Caterpillar D11 load made it a worthwhile catch. The low line runs between Peoria Junction and Adams Street Yard, the terminus for MCLPE and MPECL. On a cold, overcast Sunday morning, January 3, 2016, a 15-car MCLPE led by Union Pacific 8569 rolls under the low line under the Adams Street Viaduct and then enters Adams Street Yard. Traffic was light due to some local manufacturers being shut down during the recent holidays, but tallow loads and a coal straggler are included in the consist. There are also some grain mash, alcohol, and steep water empties. Adams Street Yard is made up of 6 tracks and a short stub for car repairs. As MCLPE runs Mondays and Thursdays, MPECL on Tuesdays and Fridays, and the Peoria Way Freight is off Wednesdays and weekends, the yard tends to be full of cars 4 days a week and empty on the others. Union Pacific interchanges with the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad at East Peoria and uses the Pekin Main Line to exchange Decatur coal trains with Canadian National. On May 10, 2021, LPD-01, the so-called Peoria Way Freight, makes a transfer run to the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad's East Peoria yard. UP 7888 has 29 cars as it crosses Sanger Street in Peoria. The way freights typically pull down the Pekin Main at Wesley Junction, then back into the yard. Here, our train of May 10, 2021 shoves its 29 cars across Wesley Road and into the East Peoria yard. On April 3, 2012, the way freight pulls across the Illinois River with its outbound train from East Peoria. UP 8194, UP 8428, and UPY 670, a GP15 then assigned to this job, pulled 18 cars. Note the Caterpillar equipment on the head end. The train will stop shortly so the conductor can get off to coordinate a pickup from ADM South Yard. The UP has rarely used ADM's Riverside Track, so I was fortunate to observe them operating on it this day. At Dar Street in Peoria on December 7, 2020, UP 7891 moves 27 cars off the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad and onto home rails on the way freight's return trip to Adams Street Yard. Union Pacific owns the 5-mile Iowa Junction to Hollis line, but only uses the north end to reach Collier Yard for interchange with the Keokuk Junction Railway and the TP&W. Peoria way freights use the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad between Dar Street and Iowa Junction to reach this trackage. On April 15, 2021, UP 6849 pulls 48 cars from Collier Yard up the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad main line at Dar Street. After the last car clears the switch and the conductor lines it up for the Union Pacific junction here, the train will shove into Adams Street Yard. A block of 30 twin-bay covered hoppers coming out of storage on one of the UP's short-line connections swelled the consist to larger than usual length on this day. A signal interlocking once governed train movements through this area. On October 28, 2005, a feed train derailment damaged BNSF's main line and connection to the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad. As a result, BNSF replaced the connection but left the main line severed. So the track owners, Peoria and Pekin Union Railway and Union Pacific, petitioned the Surface Transportation Board for removal of the interlocking signals. The signals were gone in June 2007. On February 22, 2016, UP 1917, a snoot-nosed SD40N rebuild, pulls west along the Tazewell and Peoria Railroad across West Clark Street. It has 7 cars for the Keokuk Junction Railway and TP&W at Collier Yard. The way freight's operating territory includes the main line north to Nelson and south to a grain elevator at Allen Station, but normally operates between Adams Street Yard, East Peoria, and Collier Yard. The main line from Peoria Junction south to Crescent Junction gives access to coal-fired power plants at Summer and Powerton, the latter via interchange with the Illinois and Midland Railroad. On March 30, 2018, a Powerton-bound coal train rolls across Kickapoo Creek Road and U.S. Highway 24 in Bartonville on the newer line which opened in 1913. UP 7167 and UP 6908 pull 134 cars. In 1978, this bridge replaced the original that was removed to enable widening of 24 from 4 to 6 lanes. This project supported the interchange being built with Interstate 474, which was then under construction. A short time later, the same train approaches Wagon Cellar Road near Summer. After crossing the Illinois River on a 5-span lift bridge, it will diverge onto the Crescent Junction connection to access the Illinois and Midland Railroad's Crescent Yard. That carrier's Powerton Road Switcher crews make the final delivery to NRG Energy's Powerton Generating Station, Union Pacific Power and all. Maximum speed for freight trains on the Peoria subdivision is 40 miles per hour, and the line is equipped with positive train control technology, a system which monitors and controls train movements, enforcing train separation, speed limits, and speed restrictions. UP 5964 brings up the rear as distributed power unit. Our final segment is from Crescent Junction south. Crews change at South Pekin, where the CNNW operated a large classification yard from 1913 to 1982. UP numbers 5527 and 6504 pull 110 grain loads after a crew change at South Pekin on December 19, 2020. Unit grain trains are now the most frequent user of the line south of Crescent Junction. Loaded and empty coal trains also use it from time to time. Work trains appear frequently during track maintenance season. Occasional ethanol trains and other detours can be seen as well. But these days you will be lucky to catch anything on this portion of the Peoria subdivision. ADM operates 3.1 miles of riverfront trackage, shown in blue-gray, from downtown Peoria to Iowa Junction. On February 20th, 2021, ADM Transportation Company units numbers 401 and 932 pull 25 corn loads from the South Yard, dropped off earlier by a TP&W local. They will be spotted for unloading at the plant a short distance upriver. Archer Daniels Midland Company's Peoria Distillery, grain elevator, and barge loadout complex includes this notable stretch of railroad. The former Rock Island Belt Line, built in 1893, was purchased by ADM in 1981 to support operations at its former Hiram Walker & Sons distillery. The Tazewell and Peoria Railroad and TP&W regularly make deliveries and pickups. Union Pacific has access but rarely operated here in recent years. 3 other firms, Peoria Barge Terminal, recently purchased by Hanson Aggregates, Interstate Asphalt Corporation's Peoria River Terminal, and Seneca Petroleum, are located on this line. On a final note, the recently announced sale of the Peoria facilities to Biourgia Renewables is expected to be finalized shortly. This video would be incomplete without covering BNSF's Chillicothe subdivision. Shown in green, it traverses the northern fringes of Peoria County. Eastbound QROB-CHI races through Chillicothe on November 7, 2021. The symbol tells us that it is a guaranteed service intermodal train which originates at Robstown, Texas, and is bound for Corwith Yard in Chicago. Completed in 1888 by the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway as a Chicago to Kansas City main line, this double-track steel highway hosts mostly intermodal trains like this one. The Amtrak depot here hasn't been used since 1996, though BNSF's track department still occupies a portion of the property. Little is left of the once large railroad yard. Looking east, we see a couple of tracks that are still in place. This view looks west. There was once a roundhouse and turntable in the distance at right. A train may be stored here from time to time. A few miles to the west is Houlihan's Curve, where a short westbound intermodal train passes on August 11th, 2018. The train is ascending the 5-mile, 1.1% grade known as Edelstein Hill. Looking east from Santa Fe Road on April 7, 2019, train VBLU CLO has slowed considerably as it assaults Edelstein Hill. The symbol indicates a vehicle train moving from the Indiana Harbor Belt Railroad's Gibson Yard in Blue Island, Illinois, to Clovis, New Mexico. Foreign power, represented by this train's Kansas City Southern leader, is common on the Chillicothe subdivision, usually paying off horsepower hours. Just west of Edelstein, there is a connection with Union Pacific's Peoria subdivision. Opened in the northwest quadrant of the grade-separated crossing in late April 2007, this track has been only used since 2012 for short-term periods and occasional detours. Union Pacific train IG3LB, an intermodal train running from Global 3 to Long Beach, California, is taking the connection on a frigid January 16, 2020. Union Pacific train ZG4CI, which stands for Intermodal Global 4 to City of Industry, California, races along the Chillicothe sub between Edelstein and Princeville on October 6, 2019. A trackage rights agreement allows Union Pacific to run intermodal and vehicle trains on BNSF between Chicago and Kansas City. At present, only ZG4CI and counterpart ZCIG4 are using this route. BNSF's Chillicothe subdivision has just one customer in Peoria County. On September 4, 2017, the crew of a Chicago-bound local pulls a boxcar laden with canned pumpkin from Seneca Foods' Princeville plant. This industry gets occasional service in the late summer and early fall.